So here comes Miss Shirma. I'm gonna ask her to join me right now. Hey, Shirma,
Hey,
how are you? How are you?
pretty good.
That's good. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So I've been waiting, I've been anticipating, and I've been trying to say, oh man, control, control, control is what's going to be the topic today. I just played a little brief clip that, and I'll play it again so that you can hear it. But it was a little brief clip that George Carlin said, but it had nothing to do with individual control. It had more to do with collective control about the country. So take a listen to this, and then we're gonna jump right in because I know we limited on time. All right.
Okay.
All right. Here we go.
Is no national conspiracy to buy elections and control America.
But you don't need a formal conspiracy.
Right.
When interests converge, these people went to the same universities and fraternities, they're on the same boards of directors, they're in the same country clubs, they have like interests, they don't need to call a meeting, they know what's good for them, and they're getting it. And there used to be 7 oil companies, there are now 3, it will soon be 2. The things that matter in this country have been reduced in choice. There are 2 political parties. There are a handful of insurance companies. There are about 6 or 7 information things. But if you want a bagel, there are 23 flavors because you have the illusion. You have the illusion of choice.
There is.
So, with that being said, Sharma, let's start there. You know, we briefly spoke about control, and I shared with you that it goes deeper. And what George Carlin was just speaking about is part of what I was speaking about how controlled we really are in society. But you know, we kind of want to stream it to individually or within the community, and let's speak from that angle. But if you want to tap into what George Carlin was speaking about, feel free if you want to start there, and then we can go into individual or community.
I mean, I don't know. Well, George Carlin was talking about political stuff, so I do try to shy away from, some of that.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I guess on this, you probably need to be a little more specific for me.
Okay.
But I do feel that as human beings, just in general, we want to have some level of control over our lives. And a lot of times when people don't have control within their own life, they seek to control outside of themselves, whether that be spouses, work, children, um, other people around them. So, I mean, I agree with him. I mean, not to get on into political points, but I do agree with him that I just feel overall that human beings have a desire to have some level of control. And I feel that the less secure someone is, the
Hmm.
more insecure someone is, the greater the need to control.
Okay. Well, let me shake the table real quick because I'm not going to go on security or not, but I'm going to go straight into it. My thought is that I've seen in my experiences that uh, single mothers have a tendency to be controlling. And I wanted to hear your outlook and view on that because I've been raised by a single mother. And in fairness, it's not an attack because I think it's a circumstance because they have had to be in control by circumstance because usually a father abandoned them, disappointed them, and put them in a position where they had to fend for their children or child by themselves. So, with that being said, what are your thoughts in reference to that? And go from there, shaking
Okay.
up the table.
Well, I never use a broad paintbrush, meaning, you said single mothers, so it sounds like every single mother. So I can't say every single mother. But I will say to your point that I feel that when that full responsibility is placed on them, um, there is a need to manage all aspects of their lives. And so that goes from finances to their personal lives to their children's lives. because they are the everything. And there's no balance there in regards to having someone else there to balance things out, or to, unless they have a really strong village of people who are there to support and help them, they do have to juggle all balls. And so when you're juggling all the balls, um, and you're responsible for everything, then yes, there's a need to control, there's a need to protect. And so really finding that balance is important.
Whoa, that's a great point, and it's funny because I do broad stroke generally, and that's something that I learned from a great friend of mine a couple of weeks ago. Is that when you broad stroke and you say that, you automatically become prejudiced, because you are putting yourself. So I need to, and I need to practice being more specific. But I was kind of specific. I said what I have encountered. It wasn't broad stroke to all. It was broad stroke to what I have been familiar with. And I will say that I have not met um, a single mom who was not in that position of being somewhat controlling for the points that you just mentioned. So I'm not speaking in general that everyone is. I'm just saying through my experiences, I have found that. And the reason why I'm in tune to it is because I, on the other hand, am the person who is trying to create some balance in a lot of their lives. And so, and it's difficult because I meet resistance while I'm doing that. And I try to understand the history of why they might be in that place. But it becomes a difficult thing as a man, or the man that I am, to be able to engage and help out to give balance where they can release some of that control or share some of that control. But it's a difficult process. So that's why I speak from that angle, and that's why I'm passionate about it.
So it makes me wonder what level of disappointment some of these women some of these women may have had in regards to people letting them down, people not being reliable, people not being supportive of them, whether that is fathers or others in their circle. It makes me wonder the level of disappointment, because if you rely on people and then you have disappointment, then it makes you, I guess, less willing to be reliant on people and feel like you have to manage those things yourself.
And I understand that. And again, that's why we're having a discussion, because it then becomes a controlling scenario as far as not wanting to release it, not having trust enough to release it. And all of those scenarios that you just described, I have seen each one of them. Sometimes I've seen all of them in one person. Sometimes I've seen one aspect, whether it be a man disappointing them, whether it be a village disappointing them, whether it be financially being disappointed, a job disappointing them. I've seen individual scenarios like that, and I've also seen the collective, or a number of those things compile. And either way, it still remains that it becomes a difficult thing for a man, especially myself, type of person that I am, to engage and to try and be helpful, to lend support to that thing that now becomes an issue when you're trying to be a reliable source, when you're trying to be a supportive source, or when you're trying to be a consistent source, and it's not embraced, it's not welcomed, or it's not appreciated, depending on the scenario.
I was gonna say I'm hearing some background noise there.
Okay.
I was gonna say you can let them know just a smidge distracting. So, um, but yeah, I mean, I can't necessarily say that it's just single moms, because there are people who are not single moms who are controlling for some of the same reasons. Um, sometimes there are people who have had the same letdowns and disappointments and same feelings of not being able to rely on people. And so they may feel the need to manage and control their situations as well, even though they're not a single parent. So I just feel like as human beings in general, I feel like most of us have a need to control some things. It just looks different among different people.
Aha. Well, let's dig into that. I agree that it's not just single mothers. I was just using them as an example because that's a prevalent example that I've been exposed to. But of course, it's not uh, specific to them only. I know a lot of fathers that and men that uh, also have controlling issues, but for other reasons. A lot of times, spoiledness, immaturity, I tend to see that in our men. They don't know how to maturely um, exercise authority. And so they want to control or make somebody fearful to exercise authority. And that happens to be where I see their and where their controlling aspects come in. They want it their way. They want it to be my way or the highway. They want it. This is what they feel the man is supposed to be. That the man, and that too is problematic within our community. But the point being is that the problems is really what I want to address and try and tackle and maybe bring resolutions, because while all of those scenarios exist for those reasons, how do we get a resolution to release or to be able to identify the trust enough to share the control, if nothing else? Surrender the control. You know how I learned to surrender, because I surrender control to a higher being. And that's kind of where I remind myself when I find myself trying to trying to control a situation, trying to have it my way, similar to what I was just describing men do. I have been guilty of being that man where I wanted my way, or where I wanted to not let go and let God. I want to let go and let Sean. And that's as clear and as honest as I can be. But unfortunately, I mean, not unfortunately, fortunately, I've been able to identify that and practice to get a better handle on it. That's been one of the resolutions for me. How do we help people, especially now? I'm speaking to mothers specifically because I find it challenging as a man. A good man is what I've been called. I'll claim it, but I won't claim it right now for purposes of not trying to sound arrogant or cocky. But when you have somebody who has good intentions and you are not able to, one, either recognize it or you're not able to embrace it because you've been disappointed, is the reason why I'm so passionate about identifying and pointing out single moms or women and specifically.
Well, and I mean, I think the question that you asked is how, I guess, do people get help for being controlling, or how do they give up
Yeah.
some of that control or alleviate that? I think, well, the first thing is really recognizing it. As with anything, any issue that we have as human beings, the first thing is recognizing it, because if you are in denial about it or you don't recognize it, you can't fix what you don't acknowledge, first of all. So recognizing it, but then really kind of getting help. I mean, there's a type of therapy that we do as therapists, like the most common, which is called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is CBT. And what CBT is really learning to change what we call maladaptive thinking, and that's unhealthy thought processes.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing is like, what conversations are being had with people who need to control. As I said before, all human beings have some level of desire to control their lives in order to feel safe, to feel comfortable, to kind of navigate through your life. All of us as human beings want to control to a certain level. But then there's unhealthy levels of control. And so when the control is problematic, or you are feeling like you're being held hostage to it, other people are feeling like they're being held hostage to it. When it is causing issues and problems in your life, the first thing that you have to do is acknowledge that it's a problem. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is really examining your thought processes. Like, what is the foundation of that? What is causing that? Like, what type of thoughts are there, or beliefs? Everyone has a core belief. We all have core beliefs about ourselves, about our lives, about human beings, about interactions. We have core beliefs, which is like the foundation of our thoughts. What's the core belief? Is the core belief all men are dogs? Is the core belief I can't trust a man? Is the core belief I can't trust people? Is the core belief everyone lets me down? Is the core belief I can't, I need to do this on my own because nobody else can do it for me? Is the core belief I can't rely on anyone? Like, what is the core belief? And so the first thing is really challenging some of those unhealthy thoughts. And like, I say challenge, and what's the proof? What is the proof in your life that makes you believe that these things are true? And then is there evidence that those things cannot be true? Are all men dogs? Can no one be trusted? Does everyone let you down? Everyone? And so there may be people in your life that have let you down, or there may be people in your life that you can't trust. But then you challenge that belief. Is there no one in your life that you can't trust? So then you start thinking, who have I been able to trust? Who has been there for me? Who has not let me down? Who can I rely on? And so you start shifting and focusing more on the people who actually negate the negative thought, embracing the truth of, well, what's the opposite of that? Who do I have in my life that I can actually depend on? Who have I been able to call? Who has been there for me? Who's been a support system for me? What friends do I have that have been there for me? There may be people that have a small, may not be a big circle for some people, but one person, if there's one person that you can rely on, who is that one person? So that's how you really begin. First, acknowledging that you have control issues, and then looking at what are your thoughts? What leads to that? What thoughts do you have that might be unhealthy? And then finding truth of the opposite of that, like people who are actually, whatever that negative thought is, what shows up in your life that might look different than that negative feeling, thought, or core belief that you have that may not be a healthy one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It actually spawned a couple of thoughts in my mind. One, I find it pretty ironic that what you just mentioned, I feel like becomes a cycle. Like, for example, I know people who they have a tendency to, for example, if I do something that annoys them, or if a person does something that annoys them, they would have a tendency to identify it and amplify it. Like, you always do that. All you ever do is that. All you ever want to speak about is that, when in fact, to your point of what you was just describing, that's far from the truth. But I have and know people who do that, and those same people are similar to those people who struggle with being able to let go of control. And so I start reflecting and thinking about it from the standpoint of, okay, where is this not being able to acknowledge positivity, perhaps is what I'll call it, or not being able to acknowledge things that I see clearly that they seem not to be able to acknowledge or to identify or to even think that it exists. And then we go into that other portion where I feel like I'm controlling because, or they feel like I'm controlling because I don't know how to let up or let go and let God. So that's why I said earlier, I do kind of get into that place of let go. I need to let go and let God. And that's how I go back to, you know what? I'm leaving it alone because it's very frustrating for this reason only. When they are somebody significant in my life, those characteristics and those displays or those things that they're doing in what I might call denial starts to not only affect them, but it affects me and the other people who love them. And that concerns and that bothers me to life. So, but I'm learning, I'm maturing in reference to that because that would be the control. Do you want it, need it, or submit to it? I'm like, I don't really want control. I don't need control. And I don't mind submitting to it. But at the same time, I if you're not able to control yourself, your emotions, I might challenge that.
And when you say control your emotions, what does that consist of? Like, what constitutes that for someone?
I'll give you an example. The other night, I was listening to, and I told Mr. Let Go I was going to say this. I was listening to the Peer Network, and there was a panel of 10 men on 9 men on the panel, right? And they brought up the question: suppose a man came up to you while you was with your wife or your significant other, and he was like, and he disrespected you on some old, yo, your girl look nice. She got a fat booty, and man, and came out to you like that while you with her. And I would say 3/4 of the panel said, man, I would flip out, blah, 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 blah. I will, address it, confront it, combat it, things of that nature. And I will say that is a display of one way of not controlling. But then the other, there was a couple, Mr. Let Go himself was like, yo, that's the most foolish thing is to react. And they were like, oh man, you this, that, and you that. And now they're almost hazing them and but he made a great point. He said, well, the reality to me is to be able the security that you're supposed to be providing to your woman that you're protecting, so to speak, when that disrespectful comment was made, is to make sure that you both get home safely to live another day, not to where she would have to bail you out of jail or make funeral arrangements because of your reaction. And I was like, wow. He says, so the real question to all you is what I want to ask y'all is, who are you really protecting? Are you protecting your woman or are you protecting your ego? Blew my mind. So in that regard, to answer your question, controlling that ego would have been to, he gave a suggestion. Yeah, you could have just responded if you needed to. Yeah, she is beautiful. She does got a fat booty, and I'll be with it later on tonight when we get home, and kept it moving. And that's a good display of controlling your feelings or your emotions. So that's just one little example of how we as men specifically can better control our emotions. And I hope that answered the question that you was asking.
Well, I feel like just to piggyback on what you're saying, everything begins with a thought.
Mm-hmm.
And thoughts create reactions because those thoughts become your reality. And so, what is the thought? Is the thought, this person disrespected me, I have an issue with it? Or is the thought like the flip side of it where the man says, yes, she's mine? So everything begins with the thought. And that's the thing when I talk about cognitive behavioral therapy. There's healthy thinking and there's maladaptive thinking. Maladaptive thinking is unhealthy thought processes. It comes from somewhere. It doesn't start all of a sudden. It has something to do with our core beliefs. And so if the core belief is, if someone bruises my ego or disrespects me, I need to check that person. What does checking that person look like? Does it look like I'm going to punch him out, cuss him out, or just say, hey, you know what? You're right. Mine, this person is mine. Thank you very much for the compliment, whatever. It's all our core belief. And so as I tell people, and this goes for me and it goes for anyone else, you can't someone can't really disrespect you unless you believe what they're saying is disrespectful. Someone can't hurt your feelings unless you believe that what they're saying is hurtful. Someone can't call you out your name if you don't give that any credence or any power. So it all begins with a thought. Like, whatever that person said to you, what meaning did you put behind that? And all that begins with a thought. Because you can say something to one person and they don't really care. I don't care. That doesn't bother me. You say the same thing to someone else and they're ready to fight. Well, the person that doesn't care, it has no meaning for them. The person who's ready to fight, their ego got bruised. It has some meaning for them. That meaning didn't start right there. That meaning started a long time ago and stayed with them throughout their childhood, young adult, teenage years up into their adulthood. And that never got resolved. And so again, we always have to look at the thought behind it. What does this mean for me? What meaning am I giving this?
That's a very good point, man. Whoo. This is what I would call rabbit hole alert. Rabbit hole alert. Boy, we're gonna run down that rabbit hole because yes, a lot of I will say men. I'm speaking to you right now. We have very fragile egos, and we need to address that. Women, you can, in my opinion, a lot of times you have fragile insecurities. I think they go hand in hand, or they could be synonymous at times, because our insecurities is our ego often. And I feel like the same, vice versa. The insecurities that others might feel is their ego. And to your point, when you are offended by something, you are lending credence to something that has still been unresolved within you, which is the rabbit hole that I'm speaking about, because that just continues a cycle. Because who is to bear responsibility on that at that point? Is it the person who is igniting or touching that sore spot, or is it the person who the sore spot isn't healed yet on? That's a whole rabbit hole that I'm like, wow, I always get caught up and circled in, because here I am pointing it out, and then I become the antagonizer.
Well, who does responsibility fall on? I feel like it falls on both.
Okay.
And the reason why I feel like it falls on both is, as well intentioned as something is, if someone is insensitive, that part falls on them.
Woo, wait, hold up. I want you to finish your thought, but Why is it insensitive
Oh,
if they are not, one, aware that it's such a touchy issue? All they see is a reflection of how a person is reacting to something that not specifically in their mind, um, a sensitive scenario, but a scenario, or they're acting out, so to speak, in a manner that doesn't complement the best characteristic of that person, and you bringing it to their attention. How are you being insensitive?
well, I mean, it depends on the scenario.
Okay.
Because if someone, we talked about boundaries one week.
Right.
If someone placed a boundary and said, when you say this, that's something I'm sensitive about. It hurts my feelings, or I've been hurt by this in the past, and I don't really want to discuss it. It is that person's responsibility to work through whatever their issues are.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, the person who brings it up anyway doesn't get a pass, because the person who brings it up anyway is being somewhat insensitive. I told you that this is an issue for me, but you brought it up anyway. And then you can turn around and say, well, you know what? That's your stuff. You never got over it. You can work through it. Absolutely. That person has a responsibility to work through their hurt. But the person who's bringing that topic to them, if they are aware, there's a difference between if you're unaware. If you're not aware, then you're not being insensitive. It's not something you were aware of. You didn't know this was a pain point for someone. You didn't know they would get upset about it. That's different. If you are aware and you do it anyway, then that responsibility for being an uncaring, insensitive, dismissive person lies on the person that's doing it. And then the other person still has the responsibility at some point to work through their own issue, so that pain point doesn't continue to, bother them, or they become sensitive about it or hurt by it every time someone says it.
Here's why I'm pausing. I hear that. But when that person's action is creating a scenario that's detrimental to the two people involved, let's say spouses in a marriage, no, it's not insensitive when you continuously are going and allowing something to go unaddressed that's affecting our relationship.
Well, that's
And
two different topics.
but no, the reason why I say that is because that's usually when someone is bringing something to you. Well, when I bring something to somebody's attention, it's because it's detrimental to our relationship. It's not because I want to bring up something that's a sore spot to you. I want to be able to get that sore spot resolved, because that sore spot is becoming a poison to our relationship, because you haven't gotten over it, and it continues to be, and it's continuously a subject that triggers you, so to speak, and that triggering of you then causes, whether it's me who triggers it or someone else who triggers it, causes disconnect and causes friction within our relationship, which bleeds into our whole livelihood, whether it be our family, whether it be our love, our compassion with each other, our intimacy, whether it be our business that we do with one another. And that in itself becomes something that is a need at that point, not to be insensitive, but to stop ignoring it.
I feel like you're speaking of like a very specific type of scenario,
Okay.
and I'm speaking more broadly.
More broadly,
So,
and you're right. You're right.
So hold on. One of the things that I do, like I do family therapy, right? And I've had people, husbands, wives. I tend not to do couples, but it's generally, sometimes it's a husband and wife coming in for a specific thing. Generally, it's family members, kids and their parents, adult children and their adult children with their parent, siblings, other family members. or teenagers and their parents. One of the things that I discuss with them all the time is delivery. And so I think some of the biggest issues in relationship is communication skills, delivery of things. And so, yes, that could be a sore spot for you. But if you know, for example, that again, yes, everyone has their own issues. And you can say, you know what, you're too damn sensitive to somebody. And they might be. But what is your goal? Is your goal like, I'm still going to tell it like it is, and I'm still going to tell them off, and I'm still going to raise my voice, and I'm still going to be blunt and abrupt and whatever? Or is it, what is your goal? Is your goal to have that person receive it? And if your goal is to have them receive it, then you have to know how to deliver it. If that's your goal. Now, is your goal just to, I'm going to tell them off because I want to get it off my chest and I don't care how they take it, that's one thing. But if your goal is to actually resolve the issue, one of the things that I work with people on constantly is communication and delivery in order for it to be received. And we're talking about ego. So a lot of times when people want to hold on to their, I'm gonna say it the way I say it. This is the way I talk. I've been guilty of that myself, because I talk about I'm Caribbean, and this is the way Caribbean people talk. But
guilty as charged as well.
But at the same time, is my goal to be heard? Is my goal to truly resolve the issue, or just rant? And if your goal is to truly resolve the issue, then you have to look at your delivery, because you want the person on the other end to be open to receive it.
And I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think where I get challenged sometimes is because my goal is to really get a resolution. But what I run into is something that you mentioned earlier. And that's, as a matter of fact, I'm going to show it here in our comment section. You have to acknowledge the problem first before a resolution. And so I run into times and people where they don't recognize and acknowledge it. And that becomes so frustrating for me. I couldn't even tell you how frustrating it is, because I am speaking to get a resolution to it, but the not acknowledging that it's even a problem is a fight in itself, an uphill battle, to where I get exhausted often. I get exhausted on trying different methods, different deliveries, I've tried in a lot of different scenarios, and sometimes where I tried my hardest to figure out, all right, how can I deliver it in a manner that is not in any way threatening or harsh. But when I can be, hey, baby, and I'm talking, let's just talk children. I don't have as much issue with children. As a matter of fact, I don't, but it goes back to our issue of control, because not wanting to acknowledge it is, to me, a reflection of the control that we were speaking about earlier, not wanting to release the control. Because if you acknowledge it, you're somewhat surrendering. And if you're surrendering, you're somewhat losing the control that you're comforted in. And it becomes a circle and a cycle that I clearly recognize, but it's hard to deliver to somebody who wants to keep that control.
But the fact that and I say you, but I'll say because you gave an example of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
but anyone who's trying to force feed something on someone who doesn't have the capacity to acknowledge, to see, to embrace, to understand what they're doing is control within itself.
Now, I don't dispute that.
Right.
Now, so let's tackle this. Is there a need for control? at times. I think you mentioned that earlier, but let's explore the types of control that are necessary and the types of controls that are toxic and unnecessary.
Okay. Is that a
That,
question?
well, it is somewhat, because you're right to the point that you just made. It is control somewhat, but there's a fine line between control and guidance.
Yes.
And that's a very difficult line to identify in two
So
adults.
tell me what you feel that fine line is between control and guidance from your perspective, and then I'll give you my perspective.
It's simple to me.
Okay.
That fine line is trust. Because when you trust the person, what will look like, or what the same scenario that you embrace as control becomes guidance. When you don't trust a person, the same scenario looks like control. So really the fine line is determined on the person who's really receiving it. Do they trust you? And I give that example because as children, for example, the guidance that you give them, if they trust you, they go along without questioning anything, or not even without questioning, but they basically have enough confidence that and or trust in you that you're leading them in the right direction. The problem that we were speaking about earlier and why it becomes a conflict with two adults is because their trust issues that could stem from you and that person, or could stem from that person in their past, becomes a significant wedge that's forged between that trust versus control. I'm sorry, guidance versus control, constructive criticism versus destructive criticism.
And I feel like you make a really good point. I mean, that is an excellent point between you saying that trust versus mistrust. So I don't know if I'm looking at it from another perspective, from the person who's actually delivering it, as far as what's guidance and what's control. And to me, I'm looking at, I feel like you're looking at it from the perspective of the person who's receiving it. And so from the person who's hold on.
I'm trying to, just
like when you say guidance or guidance, trust or mistrust, that is the perspective of the person who's receiving it. Do I trust you? Do I not trust you? So I look at it from you deliver it, the perspective is the person who's receiving it. Do they trust you? Do they not trust you? I'm looking at it also like I think you made a great point from that perspective. So now I'm looking at it from the person who's delivering it. What looks like guidance and what looks like control. Guidance to me is, I tell you what I think, I give you my perspective, I tell you what I feel like you should do or not do, and then I'm done. However you receive it, you receive it. That's guidance. Control is, to me, from that perspective, I tell you what to do, I tell you what my perspective is, I expect you to receive it, and when you don't receive it, I have an issue with it. That's control.
Now,
because when you give guidance, you just give it, and you let that person do what they need to do with it. When there's a level of frustration about if they're going to accept it, receive it, use it, and the person who's delivering it is frustrated and takes some type of offense or feels some kind of way, as we say, about it, then that's where the control comes in. Because there should be no guidance has no expectation. It's just
I hear that. I don't specifically agree with it entirely in all circumstances. Because let's say we were speaking about our children and the guidance that you are giving your children. You gave an example earlier today of a woman who had a hot pot with two pot holder mitts, and she asked her daughter to she asked her daughter to hold it, and she said it's hot on the bottom. This was the story that you were sharing with me, correct? It's hot on the bottom, and she's guiding her daughter to grab it and showing her to grab it. So the reason why I dispute that just in that little brief example is because that's a form of guidance, and I'm not going to go into the rest of it where where we can we can later. But the point is that she's guiding her, and she is expecting her to do what it is that she said. Because if she doesn't do what she says, it will cause not only pain to that child, but it will cause a lot of pain to that person, that loving person, being in this case the mother. So that's why extremely, I can understand your point, and yes, it can be controlling at times, but I think that that's where I have trouble with it at times, is because wow, you're about to burn yourself. I can't just sit there and say that I'm trying to control you for not to burn yourself, because I can actually allow it to burn you. Now, again, that causes not only pain to you, but now cause pain to me, because I'm going to have to take you to the hospital. I'm going to have to answer, why did you let this child get burnt with third degree burns, to teach them a lesson or to not give them necessary guidance? So I guess I take it from that extreme, because that's where the trust comes in when it becomes two adults. The problem is with two adults, they take the position, their ego takes the position of, who are you? Now, the reason why I say that, because when I reverse it, when I'm the person who is receiving the guidance, I trust enough to be able to say, yo, you know that better than I do, and I am going to listen to what you are saying. So to your point, yeah, it's how a person receives it. But if I didn't listen and you were my spouse, and it caused harm to our relation, our household, let's say the pot in the hands are our household and our finances, and because I don't want to take it the way that you, who are running our finances, is suggesting that I do it for whatever reason, when in fact I know and trust that you know this better than I do. Am I the one who's supposed to say, oh, well, you just got to give me the information and let me do with it as I please? And it now has messed up our whole financial portfolio, because I took the position of, well, I didn't receive it that way, and I'm using broad strokes. I understand that, but I'm using broad strokes because I'm not speaking about when it's an issue with the individual. I'm speaking about when that issue, when you are connected, and that's probably where the problem is. The connection as one still wants to be separate, and that goes into a different rabbit hole. Anyway, let me stop, because I'm going deeper and deeper into this rabbit hole. Go ahead, you take it over from here.
Well, no, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I mean, and there's guidance and there's control. I feel like control is a step further. Control is, I mean, you brought up the finances. Control then becomes, I tried to guide this person. They don't want to do what I say, so I'm not going to allow them to have access to any of the finances because they didn't do it the way I want to. Or I'm not. Control takes it a step further where, in a sense, I feel like someone is taking away some of the freedom, the rights, the ability for someone else to make decisions for themselves.
And that's absolutely, and that's why George Carlin came on earlier, and I was saying that it has a lot to do with it, and why I wanted to tackle him, because we seem to say like we have the freedom and rights to do what we want without having to, without with making decisions without anybody controlling it, but yet we are submitted and subjected to control all the time that we surrender to. And so, therefore, what really are we speaking about when we're talking about somebody who actually does love us and trust us, trying to give some guidance? And meanwhile, you're saying, well, I don't need to listen. I could make choices on my own. But meanwhile, when it comes to choices that are being made in a society for you that you feel you're in control of, you're really not. And you surrender to it regularly and daily, whether it be your job, whether it be the laws, whether it be, whatever the case may be, you are surrendering to control from someone else in that aspect. But yet, in the aspect of someone who actually, if you trust them, again, that's why I lean on that word trust. If you trust that they love you, you know that, or you should know that their intentions are for the betterment of you and not their selfish desires. And that's where I think a lot of it comes into play, because when you don't trust someone, it's because you might think they will get into their selfish desires and not allow you to do something. In all rights, if you did something and the person is better at finances and you was about to mess up the portfolio, you should not have access. The same way, if you messed up with your credit report, you don't get access to more credit. So you surrender there and you can accept it there. But when it comes to somebody else saying the same thing, just it's more personal, you want to say, oh, they're trying to control me. No, you just did not want to comply for the benefit of more than what you wanted to do that would have been helpful not only to you but to others. And because it's a personal scenario, you don't have to. But meanwhile, in every other faction of this society, you surrender. When they say, move, give me your license, for example, police officer, for no apparent reason, a lot of times people surrender.
I think we got away from the topic in my perspective, right? Because one of the things that we're talking about, because you keep talking about other people being controlled, right? Mm-hmm. But the conversation we were having is someone feeling like they need to have the ability to control someone, which is what you were talking about before, is like someone's ego. What we were talking about before was you gave someone advice. I don't mean you specifically, but someone may have given someone some advice, or someone may have wanted someone to behave in a specific way or do a specific thing. And that person doesn't receive it. Mm-hmm. And someone else got upset, or they wanted to force that issue upon them. That's kind of what we were talking about.
Okay. And so that would be considered a rule. And a rule. Okay. The rule, you are, there's a rule that was placed in that relationship, or that, and one person doesn't want to abide by the rule that was placed for whatever reason. So the point is, because they don't want to, they don't feel to, but yet you follow rules in every other circumstance.
Well, Sean, that's okay, because you're still making it be about the other person. If someone else is trying to force their opinion, force someone else to do something, no different than when we were discussing when people are not ready to receive something. when you're trying to give someone information or cause someone to deal with the trauma or cause someone to change their mind or cause someone to do anything and they're not ready to do it or they're not receiving it, someone's need to force that on them is not that person's issue. Yeah, if the person's not ready to deal with it, there is an issue there that they have to work through. But the person who's trying to make that person be ready to receive something, do something that they are not ready to do, then you have to look at yourself. Like that person has to look at themselves. Why do I have a need to make that person, force that person to do this if they are being resistant? If they're being resistant, they're not ready to deal with it. If that person's trying to force the issue and cause them to then do it, then they have to look at themselves and figure out what is that need to control and make sure that this happens when that person is not open.
And that's why I called it a rule, because what's the need is the reason why there's needs and rules in every society and every successful scenario, so that you can be able to have some type of order and or some type of design for success. And the success, whether it be a relationship, the success, whether it be a business, the success, whether it be whatever success we want to describe, has rules. There are no ways around that, but yet and still, when it comes to personal relationships, rules want to be ignored conveniently. And that's my point as far as guidance versus control. Guidance is trying to have rules that will create successful outcomes for the two or all the people involved, not just for the individual and what they feel or what they want and what they think in that scenario. And so, go ahead.
So I'm going to say, if I'm here to talk about things from a therapeutic standpoint and psychological standpoint, that's not what we're doing.
Okay.
I'm talking about, my perspective is always mental health. My perspective, because that's why I'm here. So my perspective is for people to look at their own issues, deal with their own mental health issues, deal with their own history, deal with their own things. And so what I'm hearing from you is I understand what you're saying, because outside of this, everything that you're saying is true. In regards to society does have rules. In regards to people do have to follow rules. But at the same time, what you're not looking at and what we're not discussing is the person who is trying to control the issue. We're not discussing the issues that they may have. We're not discussing what their need is to cause someone to follow their rules. Let me give you an example. I deal with families all the time who someone has an addiction issue. It could be a spouse who is addicted to drugs or alcohol. It could be a child who's addicted to drugs and alcohol. They want that person to be clean. Is it in their best interest? Absolutely. Should they be using drugs and alcohol if it's causing them issues in their lives? No, they shouldn't. There's some people who can use recreationally. There's a lot of people who become addicted and they do things out of character. They lose jobs, they steal things, they OD, they do a lot of things outside of character. Here you have family members who have come and done interventions on these people. Everybody gets together, the person comes in the room, hey, Joe, you need to go to treatment. He doesn't want to go to treatment. So there's a need there for, I'm going to make him go. You can't. That person, so when I'm dealing with, for example, families who are trying to force that, the person is not going to be successful in recovery because they're not ready. They're not acknowledging the issue. They're not dealing with the issue. They're not ready to deal with the issue. So if that family member then is forcing that upon them, then it's no longer about that person. That's the same thing that you talk about surrendering, because at that point you have to surrender. You can guide someone, and you're right. It has to do with trust, But sometimes it's about trusting you, but sometimes it's even about that person having trust for themselves, having trust that they can do it, having trust in their own ability to be successful, or their ability that if they change their life, it's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
But if that person gets caught up in trying to now make the fact that that person rejected their offer for treatment or rejected their offer to get help be about themselves, and they're angry and they're, well, why won't you do it, and forcing an issue, it's now it's about you. It becomes about you now, your ego, your disappointment, your need to control the situation, your whatever. And you have to say, you know what? They're not in a place to take my guidance. They're not trying to take my advice. I mean well, and it's for their own good, but they don't want it. And then that's where you walk away until that person is open and ready to receive it. So that's the point that I'm trying to make beyond what society gives.
I agree.
Right. So that's what I mean in regards to, then we have to look at ourselves. Like, what is it about me that I'm trying to force this scenario or make this change happen when this person is not willing or open to receive it, whether they trust me or not. They may not trust me, and that's their right. But then it becomes about me if I get caught up in that and I make this the whole issue, and now I'm trying to force it on them, or make it become a big problem for myself.
You're absolutely right. And I guess my maturity level is because when I get to that point, let's use the example of my relative who's on drugs. We do an intervention. I'm more like, you're right, I'm walking away. But I'm not only my maturity level hasn't increased to where I walk away without, I don't say anything. But if they ask me, yo, you're just a complete mess up. You don't want no help. You don't want nobody, and that's something that I would need to work on, because at that point I'm like, yo, I can't be dishonest, and I think that I don't need to be harsh, but sometimes that's my delivery. Like, hey, it's difficult as Miss no matter she said it's difficult to we have to learn to meet people where they are. You're right. And I have challenges with that. When you say me, that's what I look into. I'm like, yo, it's hard for me to look at, and it's not. But the thing is, I do look at people for where they are. I do accept people for where they are. I don't really accept when they are in a place and they're lying to themselves, which is then lying to me. And so I'm like, all right, yeah. For example, like I said, the drug addict. Oh, I ain't doing this. Yo, I just saw you. You just stole this from me. I didn't say anything about it. I'm giving you the pass, but you telling me you didn't steal it from me? And I sat there and watched you. Not only did I watch you, I almost caught you before you sold it to the next person. My stuff, and you're telling me you didn't do it? And this is kind of an extreme example of what I actually have been through. But
it's not an extreme example because it happens.
Right.
All the time.
And I'm saying that at that point, it wasn't that I was trying to control or force. It was that I was trying not to get to the point of where I was ignorantly reacting.
So let me say this, Sean. I don't look at that as control or force. I don't even look at someone who says you just messed up, like you just want to stay messed up, and that's tough love. That's what we call tough love. So I don't look at that as being controlling. What I look at as being controlling is when someone does that intervention and the person doesn't want it, and rather than say, you know what, you don't want it, you want to stay jacked up, you know, I can't make you be better, and walk away until that person's ready. Where the control comes in is where someone continues to come back and try to force that person into, you need to go to treatment. And then next week, you need to go to treatment. And they're like, I'm not ready. Okay, I'll buy you a car if you go to treatment. I'll pay your bills if you go to treatment. I'm going to put you out, you know, it's that bargaining, when it comes to this type of thing and that codependency, it's that whole bargaining, trying to coax someone, get someone to do what you want them to do, rather than, as Miss Jordan Favor saying, meeting them where they are and saying, you know what? I gave the guidance. They don't want it. I'm going to walk away. And this is where we also talk about boundaries. This is where now a boundary is put up. You can't be in my life this way. I don't trust you. You steal from me, or you've wreaked havoc in my life. So you can't be around me, can't be around my kids. And you put up a boundary. But continuously coming and trying to make that person be ready to change, and make that person be ready to deal with their issues. That's where the control part is what I'm, referring to.
And I get that. And I guess where I not push back, but where I fall short, or where people fall short, I'm getting out of it personally. But where people fall short is that defining that fine love between what you just described as being not the bargaining part, but the consistently trying and trying and trying, is that's what people do when they love, they don't give up on. And so it becomes a fine line between, and it's not a person who's saying, not the description of what we said, where the person said, I ain't ready. But when a person said, is denying that I don't have a problem. And you sometimes just give, you say, all right, whatever. And then you still you see the problem and you still want to address it, not specifically to control it, but you still like, yo, man, you still on drugs. And you try again. And you try again. So that's kind of what happens in a lot of people's lives, and they call it love and not giving up and not giving up hope. And it's really a fine line between that and what you just described, which is controlling. And I think that it can look like control. Or maybe I'm asking the question, having that type of love that you don't want to give up. Let's say it's a mother and a child, or a father and a child. And so that child is always on, and you're like, I'm not giving up. I just can't let them go like that. I'll let them go for the time. I'm going to leave it alone right now, but I'm going to readdress it, the next time maybe I see them or we encounter each other, and see if they're there again. How do we kind of juggle that?
People do things when they're ready. So you can continue if you choose, but no matter, one of the things when I work with addicts, the ones that came into treatment for someone else other than themselves relapse, typically. When you do it for yourself, and doing it for yourself can be, I want to do this for myself because I want to have a better family relationship. I want a better relationship with my, my significant other. I want a better relationship with my family. But it's a decision that they made for themselves. I want to do this and be better. When someone else is trying to get them to do it and they're not ready, they're not successful. I don't remember who I was having a conversation with, but I was having a conversation with someone, and they were trying to get somebody who was just unhealthy to address some issues, do some things. And this person was just risky behavior and doing some unhealthy things. And I remember I said, that person is burning their house down. Are you going to save yourself, or are you going to stand in the house and let the house burn down with you in it also? Because that's what happens. When someone, you can give guidance to someone, but when they're not in a healthy place and you continue to force it on them. And I say, there's a level of control when we won't let go. And I call it codependency also. But what happens is they self-destruct, and then they pull other people down with them. So when they're burning their house down and you're trying to pull them out of the burning house and they won't go, are you now going to burn yourself down in the house with them? Or are you going to save yourself? Because they don't want to come out. They're not ready to do it.
Wow, that's a good point. Good question that we'll leave right now for next week, because I know we are overtime. We are 25 minutes overtime. But that's a good thought. And some people, as we were speaking earlier, with fragile egos with men, and insecurities and codependencies with men and women, and would choose to go down in fire with them. And I have been in the mindset of choosing to go down a fire with my loved ones or for my loved ones. But it was a space and place of honor to me, because I'm like, yo, I used to give the example that contradicts what the rule was. Again, the rules that a lot of people follow when you're on an airplane. If I'm on the airplane and my daughter is with me, who's 5 or 6 years old, and they say, put on your mask first and then put on hers, I hear them. I hear that rule, and I'm, I understand it, but I can't. I probably will put on her mask, and if I die in the process or hyperventilate, whatever the case may be, I would risk that.
So rather than saving both of you, because it only takes a second to put it on yourself and then put it on her. So rather than saving both of you, you save her and leave her without a parent.
No, but the whole thing is, that's that fragile ego that we was talking about with the respect. I don't, my intention is not to save both of us. I'm just not listening to your rule. And my intention is to save both of us. Now, I feel that I will be successful at that. But you telling me not to, and she dies, and I live, I ain't gonna be able to live with myself.
But the thing about it is, it's all perspective.
No, I mean, I'm not disputing that. I'm just sharing my perspective. I'm saying that, I would be able to live with the fact that she lived and I died and she doesn't have a dad, than if she died and I live and I don't have a daughter.
But I get your example. But I get the example. But sometimes it only takes a second.
No, I'm not. Like I said, I can't determine, because I haven't been in that situation.
But it's your job as a father to protect. It is your job,
and that's why. Right, and that's why I would feel like they're controlling me and telling me what to do when I'm sitting there assessing it, and I'm like, yo, nah, she's panicking. Let me get this on her. Tell her to calm down. Put it back on me. That's kind of where my first thought is. Now, if it's the other way, she's calm, put it on me, then I'll put it on her. I can get that too. But to sit there and listen to a rule is where, if we're going to circle back, that's the control that I don't always embrace, or I don't always, when I say, oh, we allow them to control us always, and I was talking societal, that's part of where I break rules. I'm not always a rule breaker, but when it comes to certain things, the rules are made to be broken, in my opinion.
So I make jokes, and I'm gonna say this now, and people may have an issue with it. But my husband, he told me don't make him part of his show, but I laugh about this stuff, right? I am someone who is giving, loving, caring. I'll be there for people, but I will not do it to my own detriment. God gave me this life to live a full life and be an example. But the thing about it is, I will help people, but I will not do it to my own detriment. And so I remember saying to someone, I said, I guess I'm not a ride or die chick. Because if the feds come knocking on my door and I don't have anything to do with it, I am not going to jail for anybody. He's in the back room. I don't know. I don't have nothing to do with it. I don't know what's going on. I'll come visit you. So I'm just being real, because to me, this is going to sound horrible, but I grew up in a balanced way, meaning I got a little hood in me and I'm also educated. It's that good balance right there. But I tell people, I'm not ride or die. I'm self-preservation. I'm not going to step over you. I'm not going to screw over you. I'm not going to stab you in the back. But what I will not do is burn my own house down for you. You want to burn your house down? Burn it down. I'll be here for you. I will support you. I will give you guidance. I will hope that you take it. If you choose not to, I'm going to save myself.
And see, I'm opposite that. I'm selfless. So I'm where I can respect that and I can understand that. But if you are my wife and you feel that way, I'm still, if our house is burning down, it becomes between me and you, I'm going to sacrifice me for you. And that's just how I live. And, I understand people might not agree with it as well. And it might sound horrible to some people as well.
Well, some people might feel like my perspective is horrible.
Right. That's what you say. It's going to sound horrible. I'm like, but I don't feel your perspective is horrible. I don't feel mine is horrible. I just think it's different perspectives. And I can respect the fact that you're able to tell me that. So that gives me even more credence of wanting to sacrifice my life for you. I'll lay down for you because I know where you stand, because you was honest enough to share that with me.
Well, and I feel like that's honorable, but I feel like there's a difference between my kid is in a burning house and I'm running in to get my kid and I sacrifice myself for my kid. There's a difference between I'm trying to give you guidance and you're choosing not to. And I've given you what I have and you're in an unhealthy place. I'm not going to sacrifice myself for someone who is self-destructing. So those are the things that I'm referring to. This is where I'm going to say you need to go get some help. And I will offer you the help. And if people are not ready to get the help, call me when you're ready to get the help. But I'm not going to self-destruct, and I wouldn't advise anyone to self-destruct with someone who is unhealthy. Someone is self-destructing, and you go and sacrifice your life with someone who is not interested in being in a healthy place or getting help for themselves. And so you destroy your life also. And so this is where healthy boundaries have to be set, and people have to be ready to get help.
I agree. And the interesting thing about what you're saying, and the last question I'll pose to you before we get off is, does that apply to your child? Because you just finished saying, I will sacrifice for my child. And then you said, but for a person, if they was in a but I'm specifically asking you now as a mother and as perspective, will you do that for if your child was in that burning
Well,
house?
I have to look at myself as a therapist, right?
No,
Because
no,
I
no, no. I want you to take
no,
off your okay.
no, because it depends. It depends on the scenario. It
Okay.
depends on the scenario, and let me tell you why.
I'm
And it's hard for me to take off the therapist hat because I'm wired that way.
mm-hmm.
Um, I've had parents come to me who have kids who are addicts, and the kids were wrecking their lives. And I've had to tell them to make the hardest decision of their lives, which is let go and let them until they are ready. Be there. What I'm saying is when I say let go, I don't mean disown your kid. I'm saying let go until they are ready to receive the help and the support that you're giving, because they will destroy your life in the process and still won't be ready. People are ready when they're ready. So if you're asking me about my kid, you know, she's a teenager. She's a pretty good girl. We've not had issues with her, any serious issues, knock on wood. But there's been some things that I've kind of given her some decision making power. And there's been some things where I said, that might have been school related, where I said, I think you should do this. And she kind of was like, no, I don't want to do that. And I had to say, you know what? One day she's going to be an adult and she's going to have to learn to make decisions and she's going to have to own the consequences. And I have backed off, as hard as it was for me, because I can be a little controlling myself. And sometimes it worked out and sometimes it didn't work out so well. And when it didn't work out well, I said, well, I talked to you about doing A and you chose not to. You chose B. And so now it didn't work out the way you wanted to, and you're going to have to figure out how to fix it. But those are life lessons. And as a teenager, she has to do it. And then as she becomes an adult, she's going to have to do it. I can't walk this walk with her for the rest of her life. And so again, that burning house, I will run into the house and say, get out the house.
Let's go.
Let's go. Grab her hand. Let's go. But if she chooses and she knows,
if she pulls her hand back away from you,
right, then I have to say, you know what? I can't. I love you, and now I'm going to have to go. I gave you everything that I have.
Well,
and if you're choosing to blow your life up, I'm not going to blow mine up.
Well, Shirma, people
and so that's where I feel that people really have to look at. It's one thing to say I'm not even going in to save that person.
Right.
It's another thing to go in and try to save the person, and they go, nope, not coming. And then you go, well, I'm just going to stand here and die with you.
Well, you're right. So, Shirma P. Clark, I heard you, and you just pulled me out of a burning building. I thank you for it.
I don't know, Sean, because I think next week you're still going to want to go back in there.
I mean, like I said,
but you have to also understand that God gave us, and this is not a therapeutic thing. This is this is just a me thing. God gave us all our own life, our own lessons, our own path. We all have a path that we're walking, and so your path may not be that other person's path. They have choices to make. You have choices to make. And so that's,
and that's why I said thank you for that pulling me out of burning building, because I understand that. A lot of times I tread the fine line, but I really understand and differentiate each side, and at this point, and the point, that reason why I said you pulled me out the building, because the last scenario that you just described, if you're in the burning building with them and they're saying, no, I don't want to go, you have to respect that. And that's where I embrace and I can respect that. I'm not staying in the building trying to well, if I could grab your hand, you coming out anyway, then I'm gonna control that. But that's just me. Hey,
and it's an example, but
yeah,
this is where we relinquish control.
right. And but to your point, you're right. And I have I have actually relinquished. I actually had in one that I don't like, and I love giving liberty to the point to where it bites me in my butt almost every time. It's kind of like you give the liberty, and then you have to start, uh, or I have to start putting rules and, or as we said, boundaries up because I've given too many liberties, and now you have abused those liberties, and to the point where you're disregarding any type of I don't want to say rules or regulations, but you're disregarding any type of. It's kind of like at that point, you know how when you have an animal and they just run wild because they have no confinement. Well, a lot of times I feel I give that much liberty to where they can run if they start running wild. And the problem with the running wild is not really even problematic to me. The problem is even in animal environments, why they don't run wild like that? Because there's another animal that checks them on it.
Yeah. And so hearing all that, it tells me that you do have some level of self-preservation.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I said, I was riding a fine line, but to my loved ones, what I was sharing is that I definitely have a line of self-preservation. But if it was a sacrifice, I wouldn't be afraid to sacrifice for someone else. It's basically what that for my loved ones specifically, because I don't mind sacrificing myself to allow someone else that I love. Now, if I'm sacrificing myself to that last point you made, where I run in that building and I reach their hand and I'm pulling them and they pull it away from me, oh hell no! Yeah, all right, I'm out.
Right. So,
yeah,
and so it's the same with people who are addicts. And I see Jordan make a comment and said, "What if she can't live without you?" This is where I recommend therapy, because I've had people who feel like they can't live without people.
I think she was
And
talking
so,
about the scenario of my daughter on the plane and me
where
saving.
she can't, right.
That's
Which,
what she.
and she has
But
a good point.
But to your point, she still needs therapy.
Yeah, she has a good point,
Mm-hmm.
because that creates a whole other issue.
I
so
agree.
that's a whole nother conversation.
But she would have Shirma here to get some therapy from, and other therapists, and she's still alive to get it. Is the way I would feel.
Yeah, but at
That
the
would be
same
my mindset.
time, had you simply followed the rule, then both of you guys would have survived.
Possibly,
Rather than doing it your way.
possibly. I mean, I'm not.
Well,
I'm
no,
not.
if the plane crashes, nobody might survive. But what I'm saying is, if you keep using the mask example,
Right, but the whole thing
and it
is,
only takes a few seconds to put it on you and hand it to her.
But I'm not disputing that. And I said if I defy that rule, it's not like I'm just going to be defiant because I want to be defiant. If I'm being defiant, it's because I'm assessing it differently than what their rules say.
And you know what I say? I'm
that?
older. Her lungs are better than mine. She can hold her breath a little bit longer than me. I'm going to put the mask on, then give her the mask, because her lungs are going to be in better shape. Then she's going to be healthier than me because she's younger. So that's
and I won't dispute that. I see both points.
I mean, I'm joking.
We got to get out of here. I'm sorry
digress.
for keeping you over time, but I always enjoyed your time, and thank you. And thank you, everybody who joined us for here on Instagram, down here on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you all for your comments. We love you all. Have a great evening. I'm gonna say a prayer offline because we're faced with time. So God bless. We love you. Take care. Thank you, Shirma. I'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks, Sean.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
All right.